Okay, next up, we have Connecticut parent Cheryl Hill. Last year, Cheryl began noticing changes in her son that seemed to coincide with the school's curricula. He was in second grade at the time. She continually communicated with the school. She voiced her concerns and asked questions about the changes in the curricula. The school never mentioned the Common Core. Her son continued to struggle, and Cheryl continued to search for answers. One evening, she read a teacher's resignation letter that was posted online. The teacher loved her profession, yet was resigning. The teacher cited Common Core as her reason for leaving. Cheryl decided to do some research to understand what was so bad about it, but everything she read about Common Core sounded wonderful. Continuing to delve more deeply into the Common Core information and avoiding some of the more extreme arguments that rang of conspiracy, she sought out original state and federal documents, facts, and credible sources. This evidence confirmed what the teacher had stated about Common Core. Here to present some of the research that she has found, please welcome Cheryl Hill.
Thank you, and thank you for coming out today. I'm so glad that we don't have the weather that we had yesterday. It's beautiful here. So I will be focusing on the Common Core test. In order to do that, we'll have to touch on some other areas. The presentation, like you said, is based on evidence. That's what I've been looking at, is going to the credible sources, looking at the actual documents, trying to avoid what's been called some of the fear-mongering, and look at the facts. My sources are all available online. You'll see I've put many of them into the slides, and I've also brought a lot of hard copies here today that I invite you and encourage you to examine. If you want to come out of the sun, I don't know if you want to do that or not, but you're welcome to move up so that you're able to see some of the things a little better. The two primary sources are from the United States Department of Education, actually. And these I'll be showing throughout the presentation. And just so that you know, they were on the U.S. Department of Education website until fairly recently, when they were taken down, and they can be found in other places now. So we'll start with the Common Core tests. First, we'll have to look at what we had in the past. Our educational model basically has three components: the standards, curriculum, and tests. They're inextricably linked. They go together. And in an unprecedented way, they all have been changed rather quickly, kind of behind closed doors, in a way that seems to violate the Constitution. The traditional standardized tests and mastery exams that we're, for the most part, familiar with, those were the CMT and the CAPT. Those were the ones that you probably took. They were aligned to the very high Connecticut state standards that we had prior to Common Core. They were a test of academic mastery. Parents and teachers could look at them to get feedback, and that feedback was used to decide what the children had mastered at that point or what extra supports they might need. These are slowly being replaced. What we're moving towards is a new test called SBAC, Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, which you'll also find in Common Core consistently, is that the marketing is beautiful. So who wouldn't want something that's smarter? So I'll ask that you put some of those things aside, and that's why I refer to it throughout the presentation just as SBAC. Okay, this test, SBAC, is aligned to Common Core. It's a test of user traits. Parents and teachers may not see it before or after it's taken. And in fact, in some areas, teachers have been issued gag orders that they cannot discuss it, which to me raises a flag. So in other words, if the child does poorly on this, can you go back and look at that test and say, where did they do poorly? What do we need to focus on to support that child? Cannot do that. What's different about these tests is that they're also adaptive. They change as the child takes them. No two tests are the same. let's look at what they measure. They measure, it's not what do you know in math and English. This is examining students, their psychological, emotional, and behavioral selves. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Education paid two consortia, PARCC and SBAC. These were groups of companies to develop a test aligned to Common Core. The U.S. DOE also pays them to release that information to them on an ongoing basis. Okay, this is taken from the U.S. Department of Education document entitled Promoting Grit, Tenacity, and Perseverance, Critical Factors for Success in the 21st Century. And this says there is a growing movement to explore non-cognitive factors, attributes, dispositions, social skills, attitudes, and interpersonal resources. The problem is that the U.S. Department of Education is shifting away from educating our children and moving towards increasingly collecting a lot of very private information about them. This is data that would otherwise be collected on psychological assessments. And again, this is taken from their original documents. This document also describes the testing instruments that will be used to take this data from the kids. Dr. Gary Thompson is a clinical psychologist who specializes in mental health testing and privacy. In 2013, he published an analysis of Common Core and the aligned tests, and he writes that, according to the Department of Education, Common Core state standards will authorize the use of testing instruments that will measure attributes, dispositions, and social skills, attitudes, and personal resources of public school students under Common Core. Dr. Thompson, again, equates them to the individual educational evaluations or psychological assessments that he uses in private setting. These are also tests that measure attributes, dispositions, social skills, attitudes, and interpersonal resources. Again, this is from the U.S. Department of Education. How do you go about measuring these things? Testing devices. On page 45, Exhibit 11 of the U.S. DOE's report, GRIT, they state that, and I'm quoting, effective computing is the study and development of systems and devices that can recognize, interpret, process, and simulate aspects of human affect. Discrete emotions may be measured through the analysis of facial expressions, EEG brainwave patterns, skin conductance, heart rate variability, posture, and eye tracking. And these are some of the devices that they're proposing to bring into the schools. On page 45, it also says, quote, while it's impractical to bring an MRI into the classroom, for example, it's prohibitively expensive, room-size machine, they don't mention ethics. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation point out that researchers are beginning to use multiple methods to explore how specific brain activity is correlated with other cognitive and affective indicators that are practical to measure in school settings, which I believe some of these are, and actually they're coming out with many more, but some of these are here. How do you test psychometrics? With testing instruments above and the new ones, and adaptive tests. Educational data mining is the subject of this October 2012 publication from the U.S. Department of Education entitled Enhancing Teaching and Learning Through Educational Data Mining and Learning Analytics. Data mining. That's the term that comes from the U.S. Department of Education. This document describes in depth how data is to be extracted. The documents refer to a minimum, there's documents out there that refer to a minimum of 400 data points per child. It is much higher. These data points will be collected as we move to the one-to-one tech devices that each kid will have on a tagged curriculum of Common Core. But the biggest data mining opportunity remains the SBAC, computerized adaptive testing. Adaptivity, from this dot I'm quoting, adaptivity provides great potential for collecting micro-level data about behavioral performance, affective, and physiological responses. The SBAC goes beyond academics to data mine, micro-level data that is highly private and akin to psychological assessments. The problem is that these collect the same information as psychological assessments that in a private setting, parents would need to be informed about. They would need to give their written consent, but in the case of our children, it's being done without either. We're not being told, and they don't need our consent. Is this legal for the Department of Education and SBAC to be doing? Dr. Gary Thompson, I mentioned before, psychologist and an expert in testing in both school and private setting, and he's also an expert in the privacy laws surrounding these. I really encourage you to look at his document entitled Common Core, A Mental Health Professional and Parent's Perspective. Dr. Carey states that in a private setting, this highly sensitive, extremely personal information is subjected to multiple federal, state, and professional association regulations when it comes to protecting and releasing health records. Still quoting, Common Core state standards radically changes this game. Buried in the fine print of Common Core is a provision that allows participating school districts to ignore HIPAA protections. The newly revised FERPA laws grant school districts and state HIPAA privacy waivers. They're not informing parents. They're not obtaining our permission. It's not protected by HIPAA, and there's loosened privacy laws. Our children's information is vulnerable. Does it stay in the school district? No. Deborah Stevenson had mentioned the P20. This is preschool through workforce, although in some areas it's being recognized as prenatal through workforce. This document, dated August 11, 2014, is from the Office of Legislative Research for the Connecticut General Assembly. It describes the P20. The P20 is, like you had said, they're preschool through 20, but they also say it goes through to the workforce. So essentially, prenatal through workforce, which can be interpreted as lifetime. It is a lifelong citizen registry. Page 1 states that they strip and destroy the P2. P2 is that personally identifying information. However, on page 6, as I've highlighted here, it says that it retains. So first they say they strip it, but then they're saying they retain the personally identifiable information, including the Social Security number, because the data must be personally identifiable in order for the Department of Labor's matching software to work. The matching software uses P2 to match data about the same individual among multiple agencies. It lists several of these, including name, date of birth, Social Security number, state identifier, and more. Barriers between governmental agencies are being taken down so that your child's information can be more easily shared. The database, it also states that the database is currently being piloted. Translation is an experiment, and it's happening now. Continuing with that August 2014 document of the Office of Legislative Research, the P20 win. On page 7, the Connecticut General Assembly tells us that we cannot opt out of P20. They explain that the P2, our most sensitive information, is allowed to be collected without consent, not protected by FERPA adequately, and we cannot opt out. So is this, I'm wondering, the same as when they assert that we can't opt out of the SBAC? Again, it speaks to what Deborah Stevenson had spoke of our inalienable rights. This is a lifelong citizen registry, essentially, they're saying without choice, ethics or concrete safeguards, and on page 8, they tell us they've taken pledges. I think that might be akin to a pinky swear. No concrete sound laws protecting our children, but we'll do our best. We have these are the assurances of our Connecticut agency. And as an aside, will this stay safe and within Connecticut? Right? We know it's not staying within the school. Is it staying within Connecticut? No. That data that starts at your child's desk and through that tagged curriculum, through the SBAC, it bounces around the state agencies, is mandated to be loaded into an SLDS. That is State Longitudinal Data System. In 2009, states in the U.S. had taken federal grant money, and I put grant in quotes because it could be considered bribe. Grant money to build identical systems. They can be connected together, hence longitudinal. The data continues through a web of technical pathways to the SBAC. Then the U.S. Department of Education buys some of that data back for themselves. It goes to the Department of Labor and is shared and or sold to vendors and third parties. And here I put this is obviously not an official, my circles with Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, but what I'm just trying to demonstrate is that you have all of the states. They've each built identical systems so that the SLDS can then plug into them, kind of like a socket. This begs the question, are there limits on where this data goes or whom has access? Yes, there is. The only document I could find that suggests there are any limitations is this. This is the Data for Action 2013 from the state of Connecticut. It states, and I quote, under the Access and Choice section, in Connecticut, parents do not have access to their own children's data that follows them through that follows their children's over time. Why would we allow our children's psychological data to be collected and shared? The original question on the first slide is, what is the SBAC and why should I care? SBAC is the assessment tied to the Common Core. It is the shift, demonstrates the shift from academics to brain mapping. Another quote. It does this by collecting, measuring, and sharing non-cognitive traits. In summary, some of the concerns, just some, are data mining of psychological behavior psychometrics, HIPAA waivers, FERPA is loosened, P20 with your P2, most personally identifiable information intact, SLDS, which is de facto National Citizen Lifelong Registry, sharing, selling of agencies, vendors, third parties. The SBAC is aligned to Common Core, which has its own legal, ethical, and merit concerns. The other one is Teach to the Test. As you may be aware, the high-stakes tests culminate in a test-driven culture that's not working. It takes away from instructional and learning time. It's a punitive system with arbitrary cut rates and a built-in failure rate, and it's misleading schools into being labeled as failures, which starts the process of turning them into charter or choice schools and basically handing them over to our government. Which then, I'll go back to that, which is then generates a profit, ensures accountability to the Common Core because the SBAC scores are used to calculate the teachers' evaluations, meaning their job security, judging teachers upon an insidious house of cards. Finally, your child is by default to participate to the fullest extent of all of the above without telling you, getting your permission. And these are things that in a private setting they would have to have. This whole system has been called child abuse by psychologist Dr. Gary Thompson and Connecticut's attorney Wendy Lecker. It's unconstitutional, and there's demonstrations of bribery, coercion, and so on. So being informed, in summary, these are things that are being collected and shared. Our children's data is vulnerable and unprotected. And according to our inalienable and constitutional rights that are consistently upheld by the Supreme Court, this information should belong to you and your child, and it's our right to keep it in our possession and protect it. By now, you're looking for some good news. Okay, there's good news. Because you're now better informed, you're able to make a more informed decision. To take the test, if you make that decision, do nothing. You're already on the trajectory. Your children are already on that trajectory. Or you can decide to opt out. For the remainder of the presentation, I'm going to focus on the opting out. The best way to protect your child's information is to not give it out. It is absolutely the parents' inalienable right to protect their children, an obligation. Parents across our state and nation are doing just that. They're standing up and saying, it's my child, it's my decision. It is the job of the school and state to support that. How do you opt out? The steps for opting out, actually I want to stop there and clarify. Sometimes when you say opting out, there's this connotation that you're asking for permission. You already have that right. You are telling them this is what's going to happen. Okay? So it can, sometimes you'll hear the term opting out, sometimes you'll hear the word refuse. So just so you have that in the back of your mind. The steps for opting out are as follows. If you go onto this website, unitedoptout.org, they have state-specific information about our tests and what our laws are. You'll find brochures there and forms. You print 2 copies of the form at least. To submit it, you're going to bring a copy of it to the principal and have them sign it. Have them stamp it as received and dated, or you can also mail it certified copy. The point is to have a record. Then you're going to keep 1 copy of that for yourself. It's a good idea to also provide a copy of that to the classroom teachers so that everyone is on the same page. Then follow up, know the dates of the testing, and ensure that everyone, again, is aware that your child will not be participating. Having submitted your refusal, what might you expect? As more and more parents are learning about the facts of Common Core and the SBAC, an increasing number of parents are refusing for their children to take it. The state of Connecticut has responded in this way. In December of 2013, by issuing this document to school districts. This is entitled Connecticut State Department of Education Suggested Protocol for Addressing Parent Requests to Opt Out. Not all Connecticut school districts are using this. Mine did. And you can see my experience with that if you want to go on YouTube and look up Connecticut Parent Common Core. I addressed the State Board of Education with those concerns. Some of your school districts may be using this template. So let's take a closer look. The underlined portion here reads, and I quote, "The overall goal is to test as many students as we can." So with that in mind, they want to take this into 4 steps. Step 1, the parent contacts the school and says, I'm refusing to have my child participate. The suggestion, notify the parent that the test is mandatory, we just don't have any freedom in the matter. The truth is, they may not have freedom, but you do. Step 2, parent refuses for their child to take the test. The suggested protocol, tell the parent there's no opt-out language in the law. The truth is, there's no law that says you cannot opt out. Step 3, parent refuses to have the child take the test. Suggestion, cite the regulations, make it look official, and tell the parents they're violating the law. Because if you got that letter in the mail, you might start to question things. The truth is, it might be a law for them to administer the test. It's not a law for your child to take it. Step 4, the parent submits their written refusal for the child to participate. This is when the district takes you more seriously. They don't test. Why would you have to go through this over and over? Remember that their overall goal, underlined, test as many children as possible. What they don't realize is that, well, first of all, this is bullying and it's deceitful. What they don't realize is parents don't give up their children. For the sake of time, I'm not going to be showing this video, but I really encourage you to watch it at home. It's on YouTube, and this will give you a better explanation, better understanding of what the adaptive tests are. This is Dr. Peg Luksic, and it is entitled Common Core Results in Behavioral Change Without Protest. So I encourage you to, I see a couple of you writing it down, so I'm going to repeat it. Dr. Peg Luksic, Common Core Results in Behavior Changes Without Protest. Another one that I'd like you to see that really, it speaks to the data mining that's happening, and this was a presentation given at the White House. Speaks to the educational data mining, the profitability, Newton, spelled Knewton, Educational Datapalooza. And pictured there is Jose Ferreira, who is the CEO of Newton. Very insightful to see how excited they are about this data mining and to explain how profitable this is and what their incentive is for collecting all of this information. And they can get so much more information than they would be able to get out of Google, Facebook, any of the above. And this is every day, but especially on the tests. Finally, if you wanted a complete presentation, there's so many good ones. This is just one that I knew of offhand, entitled Common Core, put on by the group Stop Common Core in New York, and they entitled it The Real Facts Forum on Common Core. One of the things that I had kind of questioned is, we're all good parents, good community members. How is it that this is happening right now and we didn't really see it coming? How is it that it got to this point before we really understand it? And how is it that so many of our friends and neighbors don't understand what's happening? If this is the biggest civil rights issue of our lifetime, why isn't it in the news or on TV? And because that's really where that shapes a lot of what we know and is on our radar. And so what I found is there are so many organizations that have gotten money, primarily from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to support Common Core. So I'll ask you, if you are XYZ Media and you are given $2 million, and it is given, it's a grant given in terms. In other words, they don't give you $3 million. They give it to you over a period of a number, maybe like 12 months, 18 months. So they are ensuring your ongoing support of Common Core. And this is very common. You'll see a lot of the big parent companies for TV, for newspapers, a lot of the websites, a lot of the different journalism organizations. They've received grants, in quotes, to support. So now if you've been given a grant and you've gotten used to getting that money and you know that I have to keep supporting this, but maybe it's not something that's worth supporting, you would either not say anything or kind of pick and choose what you're going to be presenting. And hence, going back to my introduction, when I was trying to research Common Core and everything I found sounded great, or it was very vague. And that explains where that's coming from. So there are there's a number of wonderful resources, though, and this is just a list of a few of them, credible resources for information. Some great, my little logos there. The B is for blogs, F for Facebook, and W for websites. Some of these you'll see they have a website and a Facebook page. Lastly, I have no special qualifications that bring me here, except for, this is one of my favorite quotes. A concerned mother does better research than the FBI. Okay? What I'm trying to convey is that fathers, absolutely, fathers too. I spoke to a father and I asked, how did you first learn about Common Core? And he said, things started feeling different with my daughter. And so as a concerned father, I launched a full-blown investigation. And I loved that. What I want to convey is that you don't have to necessarily be an attorney. You don't have to necessarily have all the qualifications that Dr. Tienkin had. What you do have to have is common sense and some morals and an understanding of what is your child, what is right and wrong, and your inalienable rights. What needs to be done at this point is that we need everyone to know what's happening. And so we need to talk and inform others, our friends and family, subscribe to some of those blogs, the websites and groups, distribute information, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Write op-eds for your newspaper, correspond with elected officials, know your candidates, not their party. When it comes to our kids, this is not about following party lines. This is about your candidate and where do they stand on privacy, on children's rights, on parental rights, on education reform, on all of these things. Know your candidates, and by God, get out and vote, please. The other thing that I want to mention is, as I had said, I testified to the State Board of Education, and one thing that I did convey to them is I said, this right here is the line upon which they, Common Core, may not cross. All of this, everything that we have spoken down to, it is the parents and the community members that have the authority and ability to stop. If every one of us stood side by side like this, protecting our kids, it would crumble. So I encourage you to keep learning, to keep talking, and to stay active. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Nice job.